I was doing 80 miles an hour, on a road covered in black ice. And my hands were perfectly steady. On the passenger seat next to me, the leather was empty. The 3 boxes of hand-painted truffles I had spent 4 months perfecting were gone. My phone, vibrating against the center console, lit up the dark cabin every 3 seconds. It was my mother. 12 missed calls. 7 texts. The latest one read, simply, "Where are you?" I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel guilt. For the first time in 28 years, I felt a cold, clinical sense of precision. I picked up the phone and pressed answer. The silence on the other end was heavy, waiting for me to apologize, waiting for me to beg. "Did you enjoy my gift?" I asked. My voice was flat, unrecognizable even to myself. Before she could scream, before she could demand, I turned the car around. I pressed the red button. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and watched the speedometer climb. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to walk away from a family gathering just to save your sanity? I want to know I'm not the only one who has had to make that choice. To understand why I left, you have to understand the place I was running from. We called it the Glass Fortress. It was my parents' winter estate in Lake Tahoe. A sprawling structure of steel beams and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked less like a home and more like a corporate headquarters. It was beautiful in the way a scalpel is beautiful, shiny, expensive, and capable of cutting you open. I had arrived 48 hours earlier, carrying the scent of vanilla bean and tempered cocoa butter into a house that smelled exclusively of lemon polish and judgment. My name is Elena Vance. And in a family of sharks, I was the only one who bled. My father, Arthur Vance, was a federal judge. My mother, Catherine, was a retired prosecutor who treated social climbing like a blood sport. Then there were my siblings, Julian and Bianca. Julian was a corporate litigator who billed $800 an hour to argue about commas. And Bianca worked in mergers and acquisitions, stripping companies for parts. And then there was me, the chocolatier, the disappointment. Dinner at the Vance household wasn't a meal, it was a cross-examination. We sat at a table made of imported marble that was cold to the touch. My father sat at the head, treating the roasted duck like evidence. "So, Elena," Julian had said the first night, swirling his wine, "are you still operating out of that shared kitchen in the city? Or have you finally realized the margins on sugar don't pay for a retirement fund? Business is good." "Julian," I said, keeping my eyes on my plate, "I actually just hired my first assistant." Bianca laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound. "An assistant? For what? To help you lick the spoons? Come on, Elena. Dad's clerks make more in a summer bonus than you make in a fiscal year." My mother sighed. The sound of a martyr, enduring a great burden. "Now, Bianca, be nice. Elena is artistic. Not everyone is built for the real world." That was the narrative. I was the soft one. The one who needed protecting. The one who played with chocolate while the adults did the serious work of running the world. But as I sat there, watching them dissect my life with the same casual cruelty they used to discuss case law, I realized something. They didn't actually want me to succeed. My failure was the only thing they all agreed on. It was the glue holding their fragile egos together. The breaking point didn't happen at the dinner table. It happened in the study. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Christmas Eve. I had finished wrapping the bespoke truffle collections I had made for each of them. These weren't just candies. They were apologies wrapped in gold foil. For my father, I had created a dark chocolate, infused with aged whiskey and smoked sea salt Sirius. Robust. Commanding. For my mother, a white chocolate ganache with edible gold leaf and rosewater elegant. Expensive. Purely aesthetic. I wanted to leave them on my father's desk as a surprise. A silent plea for them to see me, not as a failure, but as an artist. I was wearing my socks, so my footsteps were silent on the hardwood floor. The door to the study was cracked open just an inch. I reached out to push it. But then I heard my name. "We can't keep enabling this delusion." "Arthur," Julian's voice said. It was his closing argument, voice deep. "Persuasive. Factual. Elena is 28. She's barely clearing $48,000 a year selling cookies. It's embarrassing." "It's not just the money," Bianca added. I heard the rustle of paper, I pulled her credit report. She's carrying debt on business loans. She's one bad month away from insolvency. We need to intervene. My heart hammered against my ribs. I froze, clutching the boxes of chocolate to my chest. I agree, my father said. His voice was the gavel. Tonight, after dinner, we do it structurally. We lay out the facts. No emotion. We tell her the hobby phase is over. I've already spoken to the firm. Julian continued. We can get her a paralegal placement. It's data entry. Mostly mindless work. But it pays $60,000 and has benefits. She needs structure. She needs to be managed. And the room, my mother asked. Cousin Vanessa is coming in February for her clerkship. She'll need the space. Clear it out, my father said. Turn Elena's room into file storage. If she takes the job, she can rent a studio apartment in the city. If she doesn't, well, we cut her off. No more safety net. What about her little business? My mother asked. She thinks she's an entrepreneur. It's not a business, Catherine, my father said, his voice dripping with disdain. It's an easy-bake oven phase that lasted a decade. She's sugar-coating reality. It's time we forced her to grow up. I stood there in the hallway, the heat draining from my body. It wasn't just that they didn't respect me. It was that they had a plan to dismantle me. They had pulled my credit report. They had lined up a job I would hate. They were planning to erase my bedroom, my sanctuary, to store legal files. In that moment, the hurt vanished, replaced by a sudden intellectual clarity. I realized I was looking at a system. In family therapy theory, there is a concept called the identified patient. In a dysfunctional family system, one person is unconsciously selected to be the carrier of all the family's problems. I was their symptom. By focusing on my failures, they could ignore the fact that my father was emotionally absent. My mother was deeply insecure. And my siblings were miserable workaholics. They didn't just think I was a failure. They needed me to be one. My incompetence was the pedestal they stood on. If I stayed for that dinner, if I sat there and let them present their evidence, I would be accepting that role forever. I would be validating their court. I backed away from the door, step by silent step, until I was around the corner. Then I turned and ran to my room. I didn't cry. I didn't hyperventilate. I felt a strange, buzzing energy in my fingertips. I looked around the bedroom that had been mine for 20 years. The lavender walls. The bookshelf filled with my culinary school textbooks. The framed photos of us skiing when we were actually happy. They were going to turn this into a storage closet. They had already evicted me in their minds. They were just waiting to serve the paperwork. I opened my suitcase on the bed. I didn't pack everything. I only packed what I needed to survive. My laptop. My recipe journal. My chef's knives. I left the clothes my mother had bought me. The stiff, preppy outfits she wanted me to wear to fit in. Then, I looked at the chocolates. 3 boxes. Hundreds of hours of tempering, and filling, and hand painting. I had stayed up until 4 a.m. for 3 weeks straight to get the shine on the ganache, perfectly reflective. I had poured my soul into these, because I thought if I made something perfect enough, they would finally have to love me. I realize now that love wasn't a transaction. You couldn't buy it with achievement. You couldn't earn it with perfection. I walked downstairs. The house was quiet. They were all still in the study, plotting my demise. I walked into the dining room. The table was already set for dinner. Beside my place setting, there was a yellow legal pad and a stack of printed spreadsheets. The intervention materials. I placed the 3 boxes of chocolates directly on top of the legal pad. I took a pen from my pocket and pulled a piece of heavy cardstock from my bag. I wrote 3 words. The defense rests. I placed the note on top of the chocolates. Then, I put on my coat, grabbed my bag, and walked out the front door. The air outside was thin and biting. The kind of cold that hurts your lungs. The snow crunched under my boots. A sound that felt impossibly loud in the silence of the mountains. I got into my car and started the engine. As I pulled out of the long, winding driveway, I thought about the law of detachment. In negotiation and in life, the person with the most power is the one who is willing to walk away. For years, I had been begging for a seat at their table. I had been fighting for a verdict of not guilty. But you cannot win a trial when the judge and jury are the same people. Leaving wasn't quitting. It was a jurisdiction change. I wasn't running away from home. I was evicting them from my life. 3 months passed. 90 days of absolute radio. Silence. I blocked their numbers. I filtered their emails to a folder I never opened. I didn't explain myself. I didn't send a follow-up letter. I just vanished. The silence was terrifying at first. But then it became fuel. Without the constant noise of their criticism, I found I had double the energy. I wasn't spending my days recovering from their emotional cuts. I was spending them building. I moved out of the shared kitchen and leased a small, run-down commercial space in the industrial district. It had no windows, and the ventilation rattled. But it was mine. I worked 8-hour days. My hands were constantly stained with cocoa powder. My forearms marked with the small burns that are the badges of a pastry chef. I slept on a cot in the back office because I couldn't afford an apartment and the rent on the kitchen at the same time. I stopped trying to make pretty chocolates for socialites. I started making bold, aggressive flavors. I pitched to high-end hotels, luxury, car dealerships, corporate gifting agencies. Then, the breakthrough happened. I got a meeting with the procurement director for the Ritz-Carlton chain. They were looking for a new exclusive amenities partner. I walked into that meeting wearing my chef's coat, smelling of dark roast coffee and ambition. I didn't try to be a lawyer or a businesswoman. I just let them taste the product. I walked out with a contract worth $350,000 a year. I was celebrating with a lukewarm coffee in a shop downtown when I saw him. Julian. He spotted me through the window and marched in, looking like he was ready to serve a subpoena. He sat down at my table without asking. "We've been worried sick, Elena," he said, though he looked more annoyed than worried. "Mom is a wreck. Dad is furious. Do you have any idea how selfish you're being?" I took a sip of my coffee. "Hello, Julian. You need to come home for Easter," he said, cutting straight to the point. "Dad has a neighbor, Justice Sterling. He's on the Supreme Court shortlist. He's coming to brunch. Dad needs the whole family there. It looks bad if his daughter is estranged. It implies a lack of domestic control." "Domestic control," I repeated, a small smile playing on my lips. "Is that what I am? A compliance issue? Stop playing games." He snapped. "Dad is willing to overlook your little stunt at Christmas. We won't mention the paralegal job for now. Just come to brunch. Wear something appropriate. Don't talk about your debts." I looked at my brother. He was wearing a $5,000 suit. But he looked exhausted. He was just another employee in our father's firm. Another cog in the machine. "I can't make it, Julian," I said, standing up. "I'm working." Working on what he scoffed. Burning another batch of brownies. I pulled a business card from my pocket, my new card, with the gold foil logo I had designed myself. I slid it across the table. "I have a contract to fulfill," I said. "Enjoy the brunch." Easter Sunday arrived. I wasn't at the Glass Fortress. I was in my kitchen, overseeing a production run of 5,000 units. But I heard the story later. I heard every delicious detail from my ally, Maya, whose sister worked as a server for the catering company my parents hired. The scene was set perfectly. The crystal was polished. The view of the lake was pristine. My parents, Julian, and Bianca were standing in the foyer, stiff and eager, waiting for Justice Sterling. This was the man my father had spent 20 years trying to impress. He was the ultimate authority figure. The one person whose validation my father craved. Justice Sterling walked in. A tall man with silver hair and a kind face. He shook my father's hand, greeted my mother, and then looked around the room with a confused expression. "But where is the artist?" Justice Sterling asked. My father blinked. "I'm sorry. The genius," Sterling said, smiling. "The one behind Vance Velvet," I assumed, given the last name. "She was your daughter." I was so looking forward to meeting the person who created the midnight balsamic truffle. My wife and I order them by the case. We send them to everyone in D.C. The silence in the foyer was absolute. My mother's smile froze in place. Julian looked like he had swallowed a lemon. "Elena?" my father asked, his voice weak. You know Elena." "Know her," Sterling laughed. "I'm her biggest fan, in fact." when I heard she was expanding. I put her in touch with the Ritz-Carlton Group. I told them, if you don't sign this girl, you don't have taste. The blood drained from my father's face. The easy bake oven phase. The wasted life. The girl they were going to force into a data entry job. She wasn't a failure. She was the reason the most important man in the room was there. This is the paradox of success in a toxic family. They are incapable of seeing your worth, because they are looking at you through the lens of their own insecurity. They need a stranger, someone with higher status than them, to tell them you are valuable. They don't trust their own eyes. They only trust the hierarchy. And in that moment, the hierarchy had flipped upside down. She's not here. My mother stammered. She had a pressing business engagement. A shame, Sterling said, his disappointment palpable. He looked at my father with a new expression. It wasn't admiration anymore. It was confusion. You must be incredibly proud of her. To build something like that from scratch, that takes a kind of grit most people don't have. Yes. My father choked out. Yes. We are. My phone rang at 11:30 in the morning. It was my mother. I knew exactly why she was calling. They were panicking. They needed the prop back on stage. I looked at the phone. I was holding a signed purchase order in my other hand. The ink was still fresh. I answered. Elena. My mother's voice was breathless. Fontique. Where are you? You need to get here. Now. Justice Sterling is here. He loves your chocolate. He wants to meet you. We can hold brunch for an hour. Just get in the car. I leaned back against the stainless steel counter of my kitchen. The air smelled of sugar and victory. I can't. Mother, I said calmly. I'm in the middle of a production cycle. Production cycle, she hissed. Elena. This is Justice Sterling. Do you understand what he can do for your father's career? Put down the spoon and get over here. I'm afraid I'm booked. I said. But I'm glad you finally tasted the potential. Elena? Please. She said. And then her voice broke. For the first time, I heard fear. We didn't know. You knew. I said. My voice cold and factual. You knew exactly who I was. You just didn't like it because it didn't look like you. Tell the justice. I said. Hello. And tell Dad that the Easy Bake Oven just paid off my loans. I hung up. Maya, standing across the counter, grinned and handed me a spatula. Back to work. Boss. Back to work. I said. Justice Sterling left the brunch early that day. The catering staff reported that the conversation was awkward. Stilted. My father couldn't recover the momentum. The illusion of the perfect, powerful Vance family had been shattered. Not by a scream, but by an absence. That night, I sat in my empty, quiet kitchen. I ate a truffle, one of the ones I had designed for myself. It tasted like dark chocolate and chili pepper. Sweet, with a kick of heat. I realized that I had spent my whole life waiting for a verdict from a court that had no jurisdiction over me. I had let them be the judge, jury, and executioner of my self-worth. But today, I had pardoned myself. I didn't need their table. I had built my own. And the food here tasted so much better. If you've ever had to build your own table because you weren't welcome at theirs, hit that like button. Share this story with the black sheep in your life who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what's the best success you've had since walking away?